Very cool. Well, welcome to the Beyond Cinema studio up here at Sundance, Michael Madsen.
Thank you.
Congratulations on having the visit here in what is an absolutely unique take on a documentary covering a hypothetical event. Or is it a hypothetical event?
Well, as far as anybody knows, it hasn't happened yet. I think if we look at the size of the universe, it would perhaps be unlikely that should not be life elsewhere. And I think that the mere fact that we can think and imagine this to occur is perhaps enough evidence to speculate, to perform such a scenario as the visit attempts to do.
The thing that I have to ask you is the thing that you ask of all the NASA and the United Nations officers and other people. If an alien were to appear, what would be the first question you would ask?
I think that the oldest participant in the film, Dr. Fassan, who is a child of the space age, he asks, sorry, I don't want to be nosy, but how is your mind composed, structured and composed? I mean, how do you think? How do you perceive reality? That would be my question. I don't know if I would ever be able to understand it, but I think that the only thing to say for certain is that such an entity coming from elsewhere, a different world, would see this world in a different way than I do, and that would be deeply interesting for me and deeply fascinating. Although, of course, it might be very threatening, because it would be something else.
Yeah. The fact that there is a United Nations office for outer space, at what point did you become aware that that was an actual real thing in existence?
Some years ago there was a hoax, what was a news story which turned out to be a hoax, that the director would be appointed as an alien ambassador because he was attending the first, you could say, serious scientific meeting in the Royal Society in London about ET and what would happen and so on. So a journalist made up the story that she would be appointed. And it's true that the UN would be involved because it's the only sort of pan-national entity who could speak on behalf of mankind. But it was a hoax. But I then learned that there is something called the Office for Outer Space Affairs, which is a child of the Cold War and so on, and space age. So I took contact with them, and I said that if this happens, I believe you would be involved. And they said, well, this has in fact been discussed in the UN. If not, we ought to have some kind of plan of action, because we know from this world, sitting in the new world as a European, that when different cultures have met, discovered each other, problem has arisen.
Absolutely. And you know, if an alien were to appear, there would be certain places, if they landed in those places, that you'd imagine would be very hostile and fear-based, and other places that would be incredulous and open-minded. And
yes.
What nation do you think would be best for an alien to land? If they were listening to this interview and they were like, where should we plan our exact landing point? What nation or country or do you think would be the best reception for them?
Probably one of the more diplomatic-minded countries, and perhaps I shouldn't go further down that road. But I asked all the experts, actually, it's not in the film, but I asked all of them to say, where do you think they would land? And why there? And most of them suggested desolate areas, deserts or Antarctica and so on, because they thought that the physical distance to human civilization would create a kind of a buffer zone or a delay that would be preferable.
Allow them to get acclimated a little bit.
Yes, and prevent, sudden actions, mistakes, and so on.
Yeah. Why is that Office for Outer Space? Why is that office in Vienna?
Some of the UN offices are distributed around the world. So the Office for Nuclear Control and so on is also there, IAEA. So it's a coincidence. It's just that the UN should not be present only in New York, for example. That's the reason why.
For you as an artist and a filmmaker, has there been a theme from this that you find is a recurring theme in your work?
I think this attempt to try to explore what is reality? What's the nature of reality? That is something that is you can find in all of my films, I'm afraid.
You needn't be afraid, right? No fear, right? So, though a lot of this film was shot in and around Vienna, and obviously other places, and you being from Denmark, but I noticed that there were a lot of countries involved in the making of this film.
Yes.
Can you kind of run down that list for me?
It's a huge pan-European co-production between Denmark, Austria, Finland, Norway, and Ireland. Simply because the film has a substantial budget, and you cannot raise that in one country alone. And of course, since I knew that the film would take place in other countries as well, it was obvious to try and get co-production partners there.
And as a final question, if we can't, as individual nations, seem to get it together enough to coexist with each other, do you think we can get it together enough as a united front to present to people coming from somewhere else?
It's difficult to imagine, isn't it?
Thanks for joining us for a few minutes.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.